right, let's see if we can't work our way through this last set of 1920s visuals. We're going to start out with Mr. Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh's probably the most famous man of the 1920s. He was a pilot, and he is the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. He does it in the plane you see behind him. It's the Spirit of St. Louis. If you go to Washington, D.C. today, you can see that plane hanging in the rafters of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Charles Lindbergh does this to win a cash prize. There had been a company that offered money for the first person that could fly across the Atlantic nonstop. He flies from New York to Paris to complete the trip. It takes him 38 hours or so to come over to from New York to Paris, and when he lands in Paris, people are waiting on him. He's mobbed. He's held up as a hero. They take him all around Europe as a hero. Then he comes back to the United States, and he's a hero here as well. Really, the adventurous spirit, the idea of conquering what had previously been unconquerable, really captures the imagination of the American people. Charles Lindbergh will be famous, and really, the reason I put him in here, besides just it's a cool story, is he's an example of the type of icons that become very popular in the United States during the 1920s. Because of radio and things like that, people become familiar with celebrities. So we get kind of the rise of celebrity culture. Guys like Babe Ruth, famous actors and actresses, guys that are doing these amazing things like Charles Lindbergh, all benefit from the idea that more people can learn about their exploits. It makes Lindbergh famous. He's got some different political views. I'll put a little video up for him about him on the playlist. It kind of falls out of favor with some of the things he says about the rise of socialism in Germany leading up to World War II. Famously, his young son, he and his wife married a famous lady too, and they have a young son who's kidnapped and murdered as an infant. And so there's a big manhunt that's going on for, first of all, to find the Lindbergh baby and then to find the people who killed the Lindbergh baby. And I'll put a cool one. There's actually a cool segment on Pawn Stars of a guy, one of the first episodes of Pawn Stars, trying to sell some information they'd gotten from the investigation of the Lindbergh baby. Next one we've got up are what are called Nickelodeons. Now Nickelodeons, this in particular was, if you look at that machine, that was a viewfinder. And so you put your head down there, you put a nickel in, and it would play movies. Now they called them midget movies. Basically that just means they were short movies. It didn't mean they had actual little people in them. But it would, these things would play back and forth. Now Nickelodeon today, we know, the television station that adopted the name, but it was just entertainment. The reason I put this one in here is because I think it does a good job of illustrating a big change that's going to happen in the culture in the 1920s because of several things. But a lot of because of the unionization that had taken place in the era of industrialization and immigration, people had two things they hadn't had at other times before. One is they've got some extra money because you've got better wages coming out of some of these places, and you've also got a shorter work day. So instead of having to work 12 or 14 hours in a factory, you got your standard 8-hour shift 5 days a week, and now you've created time in a person's life where they can do other things. And so one of the things we do best in the United States is to find a way to fill those things. And so entertainment pops up. Things like arcades. People had money to go and blow on things like playing games or going to Yankee Stadium to see Babe Ruth play baseball, going to a Coney Island amusement park. Before this, people didn't have time for those things. Now they've got the money and the time, and so we see the rise of the entertainment industry. Child labor laws are going to make it easier for children to stay in school, and so we also see the growth of teen culture happen in the 1920s. So there's a lot of cultural change that's happening, and like I said, Nickelodeons are just kind of an example of something people could blow their money on. Told you jazz. This is our jazz visual. It's going to be talked about more in depth in the Jazz and Harlem Renaissance keynote that I'm putting up. This is our Harlem Renaissance picture. So look for both of those and some examples of both of those concepts in that other lesson. One of the things that's going to happen in the era of the 20s, it's a little different, is the 18th Amendment is going to be passed. Now, you were reading the Constitution last night before we went to bed. So you know the 18th Amendment gives Congress the right to make a law that is going to limit the sale, the manufacturing, and the production of alcohol in the United States. The 18th Amendment gives them the power to do that. They passed the Volstead Act, which is what puts that into place. And so it brings about an era called Prohibition. It wasn't illegal to drink alcohol in Prohibition, but if nobody can make it, nobody can sell it, and nobody can transport it, it was really hard to get it. And so there weren't legal means of getting alcohol in the country. This had been a push for a long time. It was the culmination of what's called the temperance movement. And the idea of the temperance movement is we want people to abstain from drinking. Now, the idea was this was going to give families more money because dad's not blowing the paycheck at the bars on a Friday night or whatever. The problem is there are horrible results to this. It almost completely backfires. There's evidence that shows that the level of drinking was at one place before the 18th Amendment. It doubles when the 18th Amendment's passed. It's almost like people are doing it just because it's illegal. And then when it's repealed by the 21st Amendment, it drops back down again. Now, I know as teenagers, you can't really relate to the idea of wanting to do something just because somebody tells you you can't. But apparently with adults in the 1920s, that was the big deal. What you see here are some fellows that are emptying out barrels of illegal alcohol that had been found. There were officers that would go around trying to cut loose with these, these operations. Now, they passed the 18th Amendment because they can see the handwriting on the wall that the 19th Amendment is going to be passed. Now, the 19th Amendment, we know, gives women the right to vote, suffrage. And so these guys are trying to hustle through something to convince women to vote for them, right? Because they're politicians. They want these votes. And so really you look at the 18th Amendment and you can say that it gets passed because they could see the 19th Amendment was going to pass. The problem is women don't vote in the kind of significant numbers that maybe people thought they would. And so it really doesn't pay the political dividends that these guys thought it would. What it is going to do is it's going to lead to some other things that are not so pleasant consequences. We see a lot in the 1920s of the changing roles of women, and there's a type of woman who comes to symbolize this, and it is the flapper. Now, these ladies are called flappers. There's a whole bunch of different stories. Is that their skirts while they're dancing. The one that I've heard the most is that they would wear like galoshes, like rain boots today, but those were lace-up rain boots, and so these ladies would take the laces out and let the tongues of the rain boots flap up and down as they walked. And that's supposed to be the story of where the term flapper comes from. But this is a certain style that women were wearing in the 1920s. Now, you notice a couple of things. First of all, she's showing some skin. And so bare arms, a bare chest, seeing some of the legs would have been risque 15 or 20 years before. And so rules on social dressing are changing. You can see her hair is cut very short. That was called a bob haircut. And so that was also something that was different. One of the things flappers would do is the fashion at the time was to look flat-chested. And so they would actually tape down their chest in order to appear more flat-chested. But these ladies, not everybody in the 1920s is a flapper. This fashion style does appeal to a lot of people, but this would have been a certain set. But it kind of, I think, does a nice job of symbolizing the changing roles of women in American society. There are going to be a group of people that step up to fill the gap that's left when legal means of getting alcohol are cut off. And this guy, who's going to be our next visual, Al Capone, is kind of the poster child for that. What happens kind of inadvertently because of the 18th Amendment is we see a huge rise in organized crime in the United States. Because of the large demand for alcohol and no legal way to fill it, people that are willing to do illegal things are going to step in and make an awful lot of money. Al Capone's one of those guys. He operates out of Chicago, Illinois. And in Chicago, Al Capone's king. He consolidates his power with something called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He runs his rival, a guy named Bugs Moran, out of town by having some of his own men dress up as police officers and execute some of Moran's gang. In Chicago, Al Capone was basically running the place. If you wanted political office, you had to be in with Al Capone. He was paying off police officers and judges to look the other way with some of these illegal things that he was doing. And it makes him an extremely powerful man. And this is happening in places all over the country. Well, obviously people don't like this a whole lot. Al Capone's eventually taken down by a federal agent by the name of Elliot Ness. If you've ever seen the movie The Untouchables, really good flick. It's got Robert De Niro playing Al Capone in it. There's a copy in the film library that tells the story of this group that takes down Al Capone. They don't actually get him for murder or any of those things. They get him for tax evasion. He wasn't paying taxes on all that money he was making selling illegal alcohol. Supposedly in the courtroom, when the judge asked him about it, he said, "I didn't know I had to pay taxes on money I got illegally." And so he will be sent to prison and ends up dying in prison. But really the damage has been done. This infrastructure is set here in the United States. One of the places a guy like Al Capone could serve his illegal alcohol were in speakeasies. Now, speakeasies were called speakeasies because you didn't talk about them. They were secret clubs that would pop up in cities. A lot of times behind legitimate businesses, there would be places like this where you could go and dance, smoke, drink, gamble, just kind of stuff you wouldn't have wanted to do in polite society. And then if somebody came in to bust them, you've probably seen things like this. They'd have a little buzzer underneath the counter, and by the time the police could get back there, everything that would have been untoward is gone magically. This is one of those places where women could kind of challenge their social roles. They're going to wear those flapper dresses. They're going to smoke and drink in public, which is illegal in some places. The problem with this illegal alcohol was liquor's not very good. And so the 1920s also give us some of the first mixed drinks. And basically the deal was the alcohol tasted bad enough that you had to put flavors into it. So these flavored drinks become a big deal. There are speakeasies all over the major cities of the United States. And again, just illustrating just what a kind of a failed social experiment this idea of prohibition was. But again, guys like Al Capone are owning these things. It's a way of bringing in money. Now, you got this money that's coming in. How do you make it clean, right? Well, if you've ever heard of the term money laundering, that actually comes from a practice. Al Capone owned some dry cleaners and would run money through those dry cleaners to, quote unquote, clean the money, and so make it legitimate, so that he could explain some of the things that he was buying, and so that's where we get that term that's coming in. But again, just prohibition, real bad idea. It doesn't work out well for anybody. It'll be repealed. It's the only amendment we've ever had to be repealed. So the 18th puts it in, the 21st brings it out, by Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s. And he's supposed to have said during the Great Depression, "I think the country needs a drink." What he needed was the tax revenue off of alcohol. But that's a story for another time. So that is the end of our third set of visuals.